We're going to live on YouTube. Get that bad boy going. Ooh, awesome. All right, cool. Well, we're live on YouTube. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. So today we're going to be talking about a very interesting and I think very important subject. Primary question is the latest consumer craze around vagus nerve stimulation risking consumers' health by trying to give them maximum power. We found that it's far more likely than you guys may think or have been told realistically. So, but before we do that, we want to get started with our very first thing that we do in the beginning of these videos, which is the simultaneous squeeze, which is a Valsalva maneuver to take a big deep breath in, and then we're going to hold it and squeeze it, and we're going to help activate our vagus nerves together. So, ready? You know the drill. In 3, 2, 1, big breath in. And a little sip of air at the top. Hold it and squeeze. For 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And exhale. And if you can yawn at the very end of it, it absolutely makes the effect way, way juicier and way better. It feels amazing. So let me know in the chat if you got an effect from that. And if you didn't, we'll go over how to get that specifically at the tail end of this video. So let's talk about this today. So I get a lot of questions about the vagus nerve and what kind of devices should I choose? Because obviously I run a vagus nerve stimulation group. Technically it's called vagus nerve stimulation and repair. So we're really primarily talking about how do you stimulate and repair the vagus nerve, which is distinct from just stimulating the nerve. And it's also distinct from repairing it. The two things must be done together. But on the subject of stimulation, there are a lot of devices. There are more devices today on the market than there were when I started this. So naturally, there's a lot of questions. Where do I stimulate my vagus nerve? With what do I stimulate my vagus nerve? How much do I stimulate my vagus nerve? When should I stop stimulating my vagus nerve? These are all great questions to ask. These are all important questions to ask if you're going to consider stimulating your vagus nerve with anything at all that's breath related. But hopefully, as you saw at the very beginning of this video, we did a Valsalva squeeze, which is literally a great way to stimulate your vagus nerve without any devices required. No devices required to be able to hold your breath and do a Valsalva squeeze. So just know that you'll always have that at the end of the day. And you shouldn't expect like miracles from any of these devices. Obviously, there are countless stories, posts, videos of people from all over the internet talking about their miraculous treatments that they've had with VNS. And I want to make sure that you have some knowledge about how to select the right tool so you don't mess your body up. So there are the two things we're going to cover today are electrical stimulation and ultrasound stimulation. I happen to be a subject matter expert as decided by the regulatory bodies within the continental United States as an expert in ultrasound related vagus nerve stimulation and peripheral nerve stimulation. So I'm a subject matter expert on that, so I am able to speak to that very well. As well as I've worked with clients and doctors who do use electrical stimulation all the time. So I also do know how to speak very accurately to that, as we always want to compare what does electrical stimulation do in comparison to an ultrasound stimulation on the human body in a real context for therapeutic treatments. So here's what I would say. There's electrical stimulation. We'll talk about that a little bit. And there's ultrasound stimulation. Electrical stimulation typically offers you one single type of pulse rate. So it pulses on and off however many times per second. Maybe it's 30 times per second, 100 times per second, 1,000 times per second. It goes on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off. That's electrical stimulation. Now, electrical stimulation, typically the devices that you buy are always going to offer that one single burst rate, that tone or that frequency that it's putting out. That's one thing. The pulse repetition rate of these devices is typically unlisted. So as to what they're specifically outputting from these devices is not something that they're ever going to necessarily tell you. You're just going to go based on the testimonials that they have and hope that it works. Kind of a spray and pray kind of method. And then the intensity of these electrical devices is variable. So you are able to use a little slider, like a volume knob, to turn it up or to turn it down. Generally speaking, electrical devices, you can turn it up, you can turn it down. There's no clear indication on any of these devices at what intensity you should start with. It is just find the place where it hurts and then pull back from that a little bit. So electrical stimulation naturally fries some of the sympathetic receptors in your skin. So with electrical stimulation, you're almost invariably going to be able to feel up to your pain threshold. So the reason that they say go up to your pain threshold and then pull it back till there's no more pain is because the actual full dose of what you need, generally speaking, to get your vagus nerve to really activate with electrical stimulation is inside of that pain threshold. So by telling you to go to your pain threshold and pulling back, they're basically just trying to get you to not throw the device across the room because it's painful. The actual dose required for electrical stimulation to be effective is in your pain threshold. You really think that if it was effective at where there's no pain, that they wouldn't just tell you, well, start at setting 1 and then do setting 2. That's not the instructions they tell you. They say go as high output intensity as you can, either in your ear or on your neck, and stimulate your neck until you get tight muscle pain, and then dial it back down a little bit. That's your frequency. Like, that's the intensity you get. That's it. And oftentimes that could mean you only get between 1 to 2 as non-painful, or for another person, they get between 18 to 20 as their pain threshold. Some people can't even turn the device up all the way and feel pain. And that's either because there's something wrong with their receptors in pain detection, that they didn't put enough gel on, that the device is defective. It's just not clear with electrical stimulation if they're getting it right, especially when it's on the neck. So even with the electrical implants, there are some people who have opted to have a device implanted surgically into their neck, and it's an electrical stimulator cuff that wraps right around their vagus nerve, and it stimulates. Even they have to up the intensity so much until they can't speak anymore, because your vagus nerve regulates your speech. They have to turn up the device so high that it causes that person to experience so much discomfort that they can't speak, and then they say, okay, we'll dial it down a little bit. So it's just below the extremely discomforting, upsetting level of intensity. So that's what electrical stimulation does. So that's, again, you're going from feeling nothing to potentially feeling pain. With electrical devices, you are basically paying for about, you're paying for the full device and all that it can do, when you're only probably going to be using about 20% at most of what that device's capabilities are. Because again, they have to sell you a device that can technically output electrical stimulation, but from settings 1 through 7, those wouldn't affect your vagus nerve at all. But settings 13 through 20 would stimulate your vagus nerve, but you feel pain at level 10. So are you paying, what are you paying for there? You're paying for a device that a vast majority of it, probably a narrow 20% window, only overlaps with an effective dose that doesn't cause excruciating pain. So you're paying full price to use 20% of what that device can do, with no variation on that limit, on that number, because of pain, because electrical stimulation signals pain in your body. So again, if you what if you bought $100 worth of groceries, and then before you walked out of the grocery store, they picked out $80 worth of your stuff and put it back on the shelves and said, have a good day. Here's your juice and your lettuce. Goodbye. It's not fair to have to pay the full price to only be able to use a 20% window of what you're getting, of what you're actually buying. So electrical stimulation has a lot of limitations, but Naturally, it's the most common because it's actually the most easy to engineer. Engineering on an electrical device is simply taking a battery, putting electrodes from one end to the other, and then putting your vagus nerve in the middle and running electrical current through it. It's not actually that much more complex. It's actually probably less complex than how they used to do it. Anybody know how they used to stimulate the vagus nerve prior to, the 1930s when they started using electrical batteries? They used those like twist up electrical devices that would spit out sparks and then hold it up against the neck to stimulate the vagus nerve. So that was pretty low tech. What do you think they used before even the 1930s? 1 point to anybody who can guess. Hey, Barbara, good to see you. Thank you so much. Yes. Oh, yeah, I love these topics. I would love to talk about cold laser therapy too, for sure. So point to you, Barbara. If you can guess what was the device, what was the tool? It's a tricky term because if I say device, it'll throw you off. It's technically not correct. But what was the thing that they used to provide electrical stimulation to the vagus nerve prior to the invention of the electrical battery? Can anybody guess? I'll give you 30 seconds to guess, and then I'll come back. That's awesome, Barbara. So good. So glad that your Chiro is using all of the above. Oh, yay, TK. She has the answer. Electrical eels. You are correct. So prior to using batteries, doctors would use electric eels to hold it against the neck to stimulate the vagus nerve. And that's pretty painful. Last time I checked, there's no dial on an electrical eel where you can dial it in. They just had to select by the size of the eel. Oh, this is a small one. You're pretty sensitive. We'll go with the small one again. Yes way. You were just guessing. That's a really good guess. Barbara, no, the answer steam. No steam. Steam would as well probably burn your skin off, most likely. But I like that answer too, like a steam engine or something like that. But no, it's literally an electrical eel, which is completely insane. And they would just, hold it with some sticks and wrap it around and press it up against your neck, and it would stimulate the vagus nerve. Crazy. So electrical stimulation is not anything that's it's nothing new. And electrical stimulation simply these days has gotten to the advancement of adding microcontrollers and other electronics in it, like little beeps and boops and flashlights and stuff like that. That can indicate that the device is on and that you can control at least the power output of the battery. Just the same way, I can dim my light bulbs. I can, on my lights here, I can make them brighter, I can make them darker, just with a click of a button. So that's the advancement, is you can regulate how much power goes through electrical devices. So electrical devices that stimulate your vagus nerve will do all of that, all of the above. So, but they typically don't list the rate at which they pulse and all that kind of stuff. Now, it must be said before we go to the ultrasound option, which is something that's really never taken into account, is that when your body is in a state of illness, when your body is not doing its best, it can really only take a certain threshold of stimulation anyways. What's a good example of this? So I like to think of, if you think of a vagus nerve like a big rope, like a big rope that's really thick. On the outside, you have the fibers, and on the inside, it's the coil, the core center of a rope. When your vagus nerve is ill, when it's inflamed, when it's not doing so good, when there's Lyme and there's cortisol flowing through it and your vagus nerve is stressed out, you can only apply a 10% modification on the outside layer of that vagus nerve. If you go and you stimulate it and you activate 11% of the outward fibers of a vagus nerve, the entire vagus nerve will begin to seize up and freeze and stop functioning properly. So if you are really sick, the intensity that you can use needs to be very low. You shouldn't be feeling much stimulation when you start. This is typically why people are very confused that when they go to these other Facebook groups and they're saying, oh yeah, just put a TENS unit on your neck. It's great. It's usually the young giving the advice to the old. A young 20-year-old strapping young lad telling an 80-year-old woman in the UK that she should put electrodes on her neck because it helped him with his issues. She goes, oh man, well, it must work for me too. You typically don't see the, oh my God, that sent me shrieking in pain. It was too much for the vagus nerve. So when you're at that level of illness, 10% of what the vagus nerve can even take should never be gone over. You shouldn't be increasing the threshold of stimulation at a state of very chronic illness. So you have to know specifically, like, what are the ratings? What's the threshold of stimulation for the vagus nerve when you're really, really sick versus when you're medium and versus when you're really healthy. A really healthy person can wear a vagus nerve stimulator on their neck and probably go full power, and they're going to be fine. But if you're in that early stage and you start whacking it with high power, you actually risk turning off the vagus nerve completely. You can cause it to seize up and to stop functioning. For a moment, you can shock it, you can stun it that way. So this is why I'm personally not a big fan of electrical stimulation. Not simply because I don't make devices like that. I can. Look, guys, I ran a course for many years called VegasCure.com. So we actually do run a website called VegasCure.com. I'll put that in the chat. That gives people specific and authorized, reproducible, clinical grade advice on how to use, if you are going to do it anyway, against my warnings not to. If you are going to use any type of electrical stimulation, that the Vegas Cure website has an online course you can log into for free and go check that out and read and get the actual numbers. That will tell you the specific frequencies, the intensities, the right tools to use. Most people select the wrong tool in the get-go. You know, if you select the wrong type of equipment and then you try to use it based on published research, how in the world are you going to get that? If you're trying to replicate studies, which all these electrical device things are, they're trying to replicate a study that they read that they didn't do themselves. They're just trying to replicate the numbers of a study, and you're not going to be using the same devices that a study used, because those devices don't cost $17 on Amazon. The devices that they use in a clinical setting costs thousands of dollars. And so unless you're spending thousands of dollars on an electrical stimulator used in a clinic, then your $17 7,000 on Amazon is not going to replicate those numbers almost at all. So I really caution people against that. But yeah, certainly we do have a course. It's a free course. You can go there. You can get the help. But when it comes to things like ultrasound, for instance, so an alternative to electrical stimulation, which I prefer, with ultrasound, it provides variable intensity, and the intensity is effective at every level. So if with ultrasound, you're under the level of what your vagus nerve can take, it's still effective even at that level. So low level ultrasound is still effective at stimulating the vagus nerve, whereas low level electrical stimulation actually may not activate the vagus nerve at all. So that's why with electrical stimulation, you have to go jam it all the way up into the pain threshold and then pull it back slightly so you can be close to that stimulation station. With ultrasound, you also have variable frequencies that are selectable. You can change the frequencies of ultrasound. Different frequencies have different effects, and some higher frequencies can activate more deeper in the vagus nerve, and some can activate more smaller receptors that are more shallow in the vagus nerve. And those all have different effects. And those numbers are listed. Those numbers are available on these devices as they are sold. So you can open the manual and look at what you're actually doing. It's all listed. With electrical devices, it's all very proprietary. Isn't that convenient? Oh, we don't know what frequency this device is stimulating it, and you can't look it up either. You know, if you buy a gamma core, you buy a Truvega, you buy a Pulsetto, you buy an Alpha Stim, there's no reporting on the actual book of what actually you're doing. So if something goes wrong or something goes right, you'll have no real idea what it is. They're just going to say, oh, it's proprietary information. You can't look that up. With ultrasound, that's all listed in the actual manual on these devices. So you can actually know, oh, this is the frequency, this is the intensity, this is the depth, these are the different frequencies that I'm able to select on this device. All that stuff is right there and listed on the booklet. So you have that degree of certainty of knowing what you're actually going to be using. And then with ultrasound, because it is effective, even at low, medium, and high doses, you're getting over 90% of what you're paying for when it comes to ultrasound. So when you actually get ultrasound and you select the right tools, you're getting most, if not 100, close to 100% of what you paid for, because it's effective at every level of stimulation, from low to medium to high. Exactly. So an ultrasound can follow you from day 1 of your treatment plan to day 365. Whereas electrical stimulation, selecting it too early could be detrimental, and using it too long into your treatment cycle can also be detrimental. It may cause habits. It may be habit forming in that sense. So there should be a cycle where you start low, you build up with it, then you wean off and you taper down at a very gentle rate. But none of these devices, I've never once heard of an electrical device that can offer something like a beginner, intermediate, and advanced treatment. It's just one treatment across the board. And you really think that the millions of people they're selling these things to are all in that same exact category? No, it would be easy for them to sell you that, oh yeah, you just use this one device, it's totally going to fix you. It's amazing. No, when people get an implant, they have to spend weeks carefully tuning the vagus nerve intensity, higher, 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 lower, 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 different frequencies, different pulse repetition rates. Those implanted devices require a doctor to sit with you, put a magnet over the device, and to reprogram the intensity to be either higher or lower. So yeah, of course, it's easy to sell an electrical device, but it's not my recommendation. And so what you have to know is that when you start, if you're at really where most people need to start, is at a very low intensity, low capability starting place. Because like I said, if you pass the 10% capability threshold of how much your vagus nerve can actually function, you can't increase function from 100% to 200% on day 1. Anything above 10% in a chronic illness case is going to cause the entire vagus nerve to stop working. And then you go way back, way, way, way back. So you can't just start overdoing it if you're not doing it at the right pace. You have to do it very slowly and work with the increased rate of vagus nerve activation. So make sure if you're going to get something that has the ability to selectively shift intensities up to match your rate of improvement, not just to kind of toss you into this box of increase the intensity until it hurts and then bring it back. That's not the ultrasound way. That's not the ultrasound way at all. So, but yeah, ultrasound can be something that you literally are sticking with from day 1 till day 365 and on. Electrical stimulation is not one of those tools that lasts more than 3 to 4 months. You're really not going to want to use that device for that long. It's not a good habit-forming device. It's also extremely painful. Also, from my research, unless you do specific types of therapies alongside using electrical stimulation, my vagus nerve is doing really good today, getting some good yawns. Unless you specifically follow a protocol and you're doing rehabilitation of your vagus nerve at the same time as you're doing electrical stimulation, you are likely to lose the gains that you got when you did electrical stimulation in the first place. So if you just use electrical stimulation and you're not doing anything like breathing, humming, gargling, singing, learning, exercising your vagus nerve at the same time, then you're basically creating a very weak vagus nerve. It's like like an artificial vagus nerve, right? The reason that certain cuts of meat are so savored and so sacred in food is typically because of the amount of movement that the animal encountered when they were alive. For instance, the Iberico ham from Spain. There are black pigs that live in the forest, and they're only fed a steady diet of acorns from oak trees. And they eat these and they walk for miles and miles a day. They have a very specific and narrow limit of water that they can drink on those farms. They live for many, many years. They grow very big, and their meat is very specifically selected because of the amount of natural air, sunlight, movement, and food that those pigs get. And that ham can cost quite a lot. I've lived in Spain, and out of respect for the culture, you don't want to be like, oh, I'm not going to eat that. No, I was like, of course, out of respect for the Spanish culture, you would definitely will want to try some. This is like a staple of their diet, is Iberico ham, and it is as premium as it sounds and as it costs. Why isn't there in the United States? I'm actually surprised there isn't at this point in time. But why not just have a bunch of pigs hooked up to electrodes and just have them not walking, but just stimulate their muscles with electricity? Because it wouldn't be the same kind of thing. You can't just stimulate a muscle all day long and have it grow, because it's not real growth potential. You're not telling the nerve to actually grow. The muscle's not really growing. It's fake growth. And as soon as you remove that, if you just had a creature or an animal and you just put electrodes or wires into its muscles and you just stimulated them all day, you wouldn't be able to take that thing and put it in the wild and say, okay, go run. The thing would basically collapse to the ground without its electrical implants in its body. So electricity is not an end-all be-all. It creates a dependence that you just can't escape. So I don't technically recommend going down that road. As a short stop, sure. Like, honestly, VNS probably. So this is funny. So you know how when we were growing up, we had telephones in our house that were wired. But even back in the old days, they even had, sometimes in the 70s, I think, televisions that were like portable. Like portable televisions were more common on battery powered in the 70s and the 80s than a phone that you could call through. And there's this guy who worked at AT&T Bell Laboratories in the Bay Area back in the 80s, early 80s and mid 80s. And he created something called, I think it was called the Scott hypothesis. And it was basically this hypothesis that the two things would switch after some time. That eventually people's phones would be the things that they carried with them. Phones should be portable. Televisions should be the thing that's permanently connected to their house. Why was it that big computer, or what was it, phone screens, CRT monitors that could play off of a battery were developed first, and then eventually, other than my phone, I don't really carry a big TV with me out and about. I carry my phone and maybe an iPad or a laptop, but my phone is not connected. I have phone cables in my house that I do not use. The entire country was built on this idea that every home should have a telephone wire going to it. So now we use the internet, and now we have wireless phones. So basically, it switched. Something in the 90s, in the late 80s and the 90s, this trend switched, as that guy predicted. So let's think about this. When we think about electricity and ultrasound, if you go to a hospital, what do they have sliding around those hallways all the time? Ultrasound. Every hospital has an ultrasound machine in it. Those devices are big and bulky and heavy. Then what do you have but what do they not typically have in a hospital? I've never seen a hospital where they've had like a TENS machine where unless they're doing resuscitating your heart, but they are not using electrical pads in a hospital. I've seen many more cases of somebody getting a carotid artery scan with ultrasound than I've seen a doctor go, well, let's just put some TENS pads on the guy and just zap his muscles a little bit. It should help. No, they don't do that. So everybody at home has an electrical stimulator, and every hospital has an ultrasound. The Sterling hypothesis is this, that as in our lifetime, we will rapidly see that switch over to hospitals will likely have more advanced, more expensive electrical devices in the office that they hold on your, as an emergency procedure. I would want an electrical device in the hospital right there, something that they could clip right onto your neck, into your vagus nerve, and and administer stimulation right there. In the case of heart failure, in the case of inflammation or infection, they would hook up electrodes there. And that kind of device, you understand, that would cost that would be a $50,000 tool, because electrical stimulation in a small handheld battery device is very rudimentary. It is not as advanced as it needs to be. An implanted device costs $16,000. $16,000. And you're telling me that when you remove it from your hand and you put it into a little device, that it gets cheaper to be like $50, $100? No, that's not how that works. It should have to go in the opposite direction. You're now targeting the vagus nerve now through skin and muscle and fat and blood vessels. So you're telling me that, by going over the skin, you're more accurate. No, you aren't. Not compared to a wire that wraps directly and only around your vagus nerve. You're telling me that that's cheaper, but removing it from your neck is more is cheaper than that? More expensive in the neck, cheaper outside of the neck? No way. So where it's going to end up is that you're going to start to see things like ultrasound being less used, still probably used in a hospital, I'm sure, but way more common to be found at home. So most people will have, instead of reaching for a TENS unit or an electrical stimulator for their vagus nerve, they're going to be reaching for an ultrasound. An ultrasound will be the best case scenario for stimulating the vagus nerve. There's no doubt about that. So that is the direction of where things are going. Ultrasound will be something less commonly used in a hospital for stimulating the vagus nerve. I mean, probably not even at all. But they will absolutely be ultrasound devices at home, the size of your phone, battery powered, that you can put on your neck and stimulate your vagus nerve. You can also stimulate your spleen, your pancreas, your sacrum, your liver with ultrasound. All that can be stimulated with ultrasound. And no hospital should have the authority to be the only game in town to have those big $250,000 devices. Ultrasound devices, as far as what the price point will probably be, is like $2,500 for a small device the size of your phone that has one single head on it. It's got software on it. It connects to your cell phone as a screen, and then it just tells you, well, place it on your neck. And it'll say, move up a little bit, move down, and it'll show you where to move it, and it'll say target acquired, and it will find your vagus nerve, and it will start stimulating your vagus nerve with ultrasound, focused ultrasound waves right on your vagus nerve in your neck, or on your spleen, or in your pancreas, or your liver, or your stomach, or your esophagus, or your cardiac, your aortic arch to stop AFib. That is the future. That is 100% the future. So ultrasound is the future now, and it will be more into the future. And as Barbara says, it's also non-invasive. I mean, electrical stimulation can be non-invasive, but electrical stimulation is far better if it's an invasive therapy. So don't get it if you're going to not have it implanted in your body, probably. But yeah, ultrasound is way safer. Ultrasound isn't painful. It's effective at every threshold. It's every level of stimulation. Ultrasound works way, way better with the vagus nerve, like hands down. So that's my prediction. Quote me on that. That in the future, what you'll see less and less of in a hospital are big cart-based ultrasound machines, and what you'll see more at home is less of the TENS units. You won't see many electrical stimulators at home. The Pulsetto and the GammaCore, those will not be things that you find in someone's house. What you will find in someone's house is a small handheld ultrasound that they hold up to their neck, and it stimulates the vagus nerve. That's way, way, way more likely going to be the outcome. And in the hospital, they will have probes that latch onto your neck and administer electrical stimulation right to your vagus nerve in that context. And maybe they will have some ultrasounds there too, but I mean, hospital is good for infection, like a deadly infection, and nothing does beat an implanted VNS if you're dying. Like if I had the option, hey, Sterling, you've got 8 hours to live. The infection is so bad. If we could just stimulate your vagus nerve electrically and make a small incision in your neck and get in there and stop the infection, would you allow us to do that? I'd say, yeah, sure. Yeah, just don't make it painful. And they'd be like, oh, no, it's a problem. Easy, tiny little wires. You won't feel a thing. You'll be right under. It'll be great. I'm like, cool, do it. Save my life. So from an invasive, life-saving procedure, I think electrical stimulation would be a fantastic idea to have in a hospital. But for home usage, I think everybody's going to have just ultimately got a small handheld ultrasound device that they use on themselves, their family members. It'll be more common than you think. So that's partly my prediction and partially my recommendation as well. So if you are, certainly if you are thinking about getting an ultrasound of some sort, then I would highly recommend that you check out our page here, vegushub.com/ultrasound. And yeah, you can check it out. What are the benefits of ultrasound vagus nerve stimulation? It's an absolutely fantastic page, and should be good there. I'm also going to put that in the chat here. So if you guys want to check out the link here on YouTube, you're more than welcome to go ahead and do that. But yeah, generally speaking, I think that's the primary gist of what I wanted to talk about. Electrical stimulation is going to be overstimulatory for your vagus nerve, pretty much. But if you're able to find something that can stimulate your vagus nerve at a more comfortable rate and be more targeted and more variable, meaning it doesn't just have to stimulate your ear or your neck, then you'll be better off. With ultrasound, it can stimulate your neck through your rib cage, your spleen, your stomach, your pancreas, your liver, your gallbladder, your sacrum, your colon, your ileocecal valve, your kidney, all with ultrasound, whereas electricity doesn't even stand a freaking chance. So, yeah, I don't know. If you're looking at that as an option, like, what should I get good and knowledgeable about right now? If I had the option, if I was able to predict the future direction of technology, would I invest a lot of my time, energy, money, and attention and skills into electrical stimulation, or would I invest all that time into ultrasound as a concurrent treatment for vagus-related issues? Well, if you were listening to me and you were smart, if you were listening to me back in 2011 and you heard me mention Bitcoin when it was $1, you would have been freaking rich. So let me tell you right now, the same predictive ability that I have to have seen Bitcoin is the same thing I see with ultrasound. So, get your stocks. I'm not giving you investment advice. This is not investment advice. But I'm just saying jokingly, if there were a way to get stock in a Bitcoin, in a ultrasound type of enterprise, you'd probably be pretty good off, I would say. Would be a relatively smart place to put your money, knowing the direction of where ultrasound is going. So that's my recommendation. But yeah, super cool, super stoked. Anyway, Barb, what you gotta do? Sorry, I hate yawning in middle of the video. What you've got to do is middle of the day, get a lot of sun, then lay in bed, and then get on camera for 39 minutes, and then just talk about something that you're passionate about. You'll probably yawn a couple times. Is my best guess. So yeah, it's a Saturday. I was just like, I'm gonna take a little nap at 2:00, and I wake up at 3. I'm like, oh my god, I gotta get ready for this video. So oh my gosh, I'm gonna sleep so good tonight. All right, cool. Well, I wish you could do anything and everything you wanted, Barb. You just gotta keep on trying. You gotta make it happen. So that'll be it for me today. Do you guys have any questions? Happy to answer any questions. I'll leave you to it on YouTube, YouTube or Facebook. Get your questions ready. Would be happy to